Well, good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us for this class number 4 on John Bunyan. Let me thank you and congratulate you for hanging in there. We have been through some of the tall weeds of English history, and I know some of that is confusing. It's not the kind of history, unless you're a history major or an English history major, that rightly comes to your mind. I was informed that I made a mistake last week. That was just one that I made last week, but I referred to Charles I and Charles II as Roman Catholics. They, of course, were not. They were Anglicans. I think what I was thinking of was the impact that both of their wives had on them, one from France, one from Spain, both of them strongly Roman Catholic, and of course they wanted to keep their wives happy, and so they tipped their hat to the Roman Catholic sensibilities that they had. So I wanted to correct that. As we begin tonight, I want to make a reference for you to a book that I think is a wonderful, wonderful resource on the Puritans, and I think we have a picture of it here that you can see. It's called Puritan Heroes. It is a beautiful, beautiful book, and it introduces some 10 or 15 Puritans, tells the history of Puritanism. I don't know whether it was written for the homeschool market or not. It is written for older children, but it certainly is not dumbed down in any way, shape, or form. So I would encourage you to pick that up. In that series as well, there's a book on the Reformation entitled Reformation Heroes. And so you might want to look for both of those. They can be gotten on Amazon. A really good resource if you want just one book on the history of Puritanism that introduces you to a number of Puritans. I would say that's the book, and with regard to the Reformation as well. I'm also reading tonight. I'll be reading quite a bit from Pilgrim's Progress, from a book that is on loan to me from Bob Thompson. It is a book that does not have a copyright date on it. He is of the opinion that it dates to the middle to late 19th century. It's called A Young People's Pilgrim's Progress. It's a beautiful, beautiful volume. I had to take my firstborn child and leave it with Bob so that I would be sure to bring the book back. But I think ultimately Bob will want me to have this in my library. So Bob, thanks very much for the gift. Finally, after now 3 full weeks of history and setting and discussion of John Bunyan, we get to John Bunyan's major work. He wrote 60 books, but this is by far the most well-known one. It is Pilgrim's Progress. It is a book that throughout history has only had the Bible as its competition for the most printed book of all time. Pilgrim's Progress is a story. It's a story that is an allegory. It is the story of an individual who is making his way from a point of recognizing that he is a sinner and separated from God to what it takes then to get to the celestial city. Now, tonight and next week, I'm going to give you sort of a sampling of Pilgrim's Progress. I'm going to do some reading for you and explaining of the story in hopes of whetting your appetite to pick up a copy of Pilgrim's Progress and read it on your own. I thought that we would start by just a short prologue to our diving into Pilgrim's Progress. And so what I want to read for you is a short portion of a foreword written by Leland Ryken, who's a professor of English emeritus at Wheaton College. You may know the name Ryken. His son, Philip Ryken, was the associate pastor under the senior pastor's leadership of Dr. James Boyce at 10th Presbyterian Church. When Jim was called home to be with the Lord, then 10th Presbyterian Church called Philip to be their senior pastor, and now Philip has left that position, and for the last number of years he's been the president of Wheaton College. But now this is his dad writing a foreword in a book on Pilgrim's Progress that's written by John Piper of the Desiring God Ministries. I thought that rather than me trying to speak about Pilgrim's Progress as literature, which is not my field, we'll let an expert speak. So let me share with you this foreword, and then we'll dive into the story. Ryken writes this: "The Pilgrim's Progress is a complex work of literature appealing to people of literary sophistication as well as the common person. Perhaps no other literary masterpiece incorporates as many different literary genres as The Pilgrim's Progress. The primary genre is a narrative or a story. This means that readers need to be ready to respond to the three narrative ingredients of setting, characters, and plot. Most storytellers excel in one of these, or perhaps two, but we would be hard-pressed to decide which of the three Bunyan is best at. He is good at all three. His ability to describe scenes cannot be surpassed." So keep that in mind then. The setting, where are we? The characters, who are they? And the plot, what's happening here? But just as we think that this is Bunyan's speciality, we remember his skill with character creation and remind ourselves that few authors have given us a greater gallery of memorable characters than Bunyan, and we'll see that as we move through. And then we further recall Bunyan's skill with plot, and it is breathtaking. So again, setting, characters, and plot. What kind of story is The Pilgrim's Progress? Well, the list of subgenres is nearly endless. The main storyline is a travel story in the specific form of a perilous journey, surely one of the 5 greatest story motifs of all time. You remember that the first book I made reference to is Dangerous Journey, and that is a children's version of Pilgrim's Progress. So this is a perilous journey story. The virtues of the travel story are one of the leading appeals of Pilgrim's Progress, as we are entranced by strange settings remote from our daily routine, though somehow familiar, encounters with unusual characters, and narrow escapes in abundance. Many travel stories are quest stories, and this is true of Pilgrim's Progress. The protagonists of the 2 books, Christian in Book 1 and Christiana in Book 2. Now remember, or note if you will, that when we think of Pilgrim's Progress, most of the time we're thinking of the journey that Christian takes. But that's just Book 1. Book 2 is the journey then that his wife Christiana takes to get to the celestial city, because in Book 1 he leaves her and their children behind. The protagonists of the 2 books, Christian in Book 1 and Christiana in Book 2, leave the city of destruction in a search to find the celestial city. The story of their quest is an adventure story par excellence. Danger and suspense greet us at every turn. Much more could be said about the story qualities of The Pilgrim's Progress, but the really essential final thing that we need to note is that Bunyan's story is an allegory. An allegorical story is one in which the literal, physical level of action is intended as a picture of something else. Double meaning is at the heart of an allegory. So, what does this place represent? What does this character represent? What does this person's name represent? It has a double meaning. A meaning for the story, but a meaning for what we get out of the story. The details in an allegorical story stand for something else. In the Pilgrim's Progress, for example, a slough or bog, modeled, incidentally, on a notorious bog on the outskirts of Bunyan's hometown, stands for spiritual despair over one's lost state. Finally, Ryken says, there is a right way and a wrong way to deal with the allegorical aspect of the Pilgrim's Progress. The wrong way is to slight the literal, physical level of action on the premise that the religious meaning is what really matters. The right way is to abandon ourselves to the story qualities of the work and let the second level of understanding grow out of the narrative experience. Giant despair, first of all, needs to be a terrifying giant in our imagination, and then he becomes a picture of psychological and theological realities. And Ryken goes on, it's a wonderful, wonderful foreword, a wonderful introduction to the work. But what he's saying here, essentially, is pay attention to plot, to pay attention to setting, pay attention to characters. And then let the story be a story, first of all, before immediately you start saying, oh, who does that represent? What does that mean? What is the application for my life? That is what an allegory does. But don't jump too fast to that. He says, let us just give ourselves over to the work itself. Well, giant despair, first of all, needs to be a terrifying giant. Let the giant terrify us as we read the story. But then, later on, as we ruminate on this, as the Spirit speaks to our hearts through this great work, then the picture of a psychological and a theological reality comes into view. So, those are some good words that I could never have expressed as eloquently as Ryken did for your benefit. I will make those a part of the notes for next week so that you have it, because I think it's a wonderful, wonderful introduction. Now, if you did copy the notes, what you found was just an outline. It was just a form sheet that I think will be helpful if you follow along in the class tonight. You'll see that there are 3 columns. There's a column that says where, and then who, and then what. That's kind of my own way of dealing with plot and with characters and with setting. So again, a sampling of some of the aspects of Pilgrim's Progress. We don't have time to deal with all of it. That could be a class in itself. There are great drums of ink that have been spilled over history in individuals writing doctoral dissertations on Pilgrim's Progress. So we can only scratch the surface, but I hope that your appetite will be whet. So we're going to start where the story begins. The location is the city of destruction. Who is there? Well, it's Christian and his wife, Christiana, and his children, and then evangelist, and then obstinate and pliable. These individuals all come up onto the stage, they play their role, and then they go. So, how does the story begin? The story begins with Christian. He has a dream, and it's a dream of a man, and in the dream, the man has a book in his hand, and he has a huge pack on his back. What we learn is that the book tells him of his sin and his lostness and his separation from God. and it leads the man to cry out in despair, "What must I do to be saved?" Well, this, of course, was the concern of the Puritans. This was the concern of anyone who took the Bible seriously. And the book that he carries, of course, is the Word of God. And so he's telling us right from the beginning, I learned the truth about myself from the Bible, God's Word. And what I see in his Word about myself petrifies me. And so the man in my dream cries out, "What must I do to be saved?" And he is in anguish over this question. His family and his neighbors think he's crazy. He wanders about the fields with his burden on his back and the book in his hand. And he doesn't know what to do. Up onto the stage in the dream comes evangelist. What does an evangelist do? An evangelist points an individual to the way by which an individual can be saved. And so the evangelist speaks to him, and he points him to a wicket gate, not wicked, but a wicket gate, and tells him to keep his eye on the light as he goes to the gate. And when he gets to the gate, he'll be told where to go and how to get to the place where he will have salvation. Exit evangelist. Enter two fellows, obstinate and pliable. They both are individuals who live in the town with the man, and they come after him, and they say, "Come back to your family, come back to your friends. Do not leave the comforts of those who love you and those you love. Stay here with us." And obstinate then says to him, "What is it that you're seeking? Everybody thinks you're crazy." And Christian says, quoting 1 Peter 1:4-6, "I'm seeking an inheritance incorruptible, undefiled, that fadeth not away." Well, obstinate tries to get pliable to go home with him. Says, "Listen, this guy's nuts. Let's go." Well, pliable, no, he wants to stay for a while. But obstinate says, "I will go back to my place. I will be no companion to such misled, fantastical fellows." Have you ever run into individuals who think that your Christian faith makes you a misled, fantastical fellow? Do you have anyone who has tried to talk you down from the high mountain of spiritual experience and to get real? This is what's being discussed. Here, Christian is living in the city of destruction. How can I get out of here and be saved? I want to go to that place where it is described in this book. How do I get there? Well, the next scene is the slough of despond. And there we have Christian, pliable, help, and worldly wise man. So as the scene opens up, pliable is asking Christian, "What are you looking for?" And Christian says, "I'm looking for the endless kingdom. I'm looking for everlasting life. I'm looking for the crown of glory. I'm looking for that place where there is no more crying or sorrow and all tears are wiped away." As we read those words in Pilgrim's Progress, it's like reading Scripture because they're taken directly from the Scriptures. And so pliable, now he's interested. Really, he says, who will be there? And Christian says seraphims, cherubims, and thousands upon thousands of those who have gone before us. To which Pliable responds, how shall we enjoy all of this? And Christian holds up the book and he says, the governor of this place tells us in this book. How do we know this? How do we know this is true? It's in the book. The book is not to be questioned. It's the book that comes to us from God himself. And so they travel on and they encounter a miry bog and both sink. Ryken talks about the fact that this miry bog is reminiscent of one not too far from where Bunyan lived. It was like a swamp. It was like filled with quicksand. And as they are on the way, remember, this is a traveling, a journey story. They come across this bog and they both begin to sink. This bog is what's pulling them down. It's the recognition that they are lost, that they're separated from God, and they're slogging along. Pliable, he gets scared. And he struggles as hard as he possibly can to pull himself out of the bog. And then he turns tail and he runs home, leaving Christian in the bog. And so he is filled, Christian that is, with a sense, a sinking feeling, a reality of sinking further and further into despair. And what makes it worse, he's got this heavy pack on his back. And that's causing him to sink further and further. Just in time, someone else enters the scene. And this is help. Help comes and pulls Christian out of the bog. And help then describes what that bog is like. Help says, this miry slough is such a place as cannot be mended. It is the descent whither the scum and filth that attend conviction of sin do continually run, and therefore it is called the slough of despond. For still, as the sinner is awakened about his lost condition, there arise in his soul many fears and doubts and discouraging apprehensions, which all of them get together and settle in this place, and this is the reason of the badness of this ground. It is not the pleasure of the king that this place should remain so bad. His laborers also have, by the direction of his majesty's surveyor, been for above these 1,600 years employed about this patch of ground, if perhaps it might be mended. Yea, and to my knowledge, said he, here have been swallowed up at least 20,000 cartloads, yea, millions of wholesome instructions that have at all seasons been brought from all places of the king's dominion. But it is the slough of despair still, and so will be when they have done what they can. True, there are, by the direction of the lawgiver, certain good and substantial steps placed even through the very midst of the slough. But at such time as this place doth much spew out its filth, it is doth against change of whether these steps are hardly seen, or if they be men through the dizziness of their heads step beside, and then they are bemired to purpose, notwithstanding the steps be there. But the ground is good when they are once got in at the gate. And so that's where they are. That's what they've come through. Help describes the bog. As they travel along, worldly wise man comes along. And he tells Christian that the advice that the evangelist has given him is all wrong. He promises to give him a way that is easier. I will show you a way which meets with safety, which meets with friendship, which meets with contentment. In other words, he's going to direct him to a way that a lot of people follow to get to the celestial city. And what worldly wise man is going to point him to is the following of the law. The following of the law. And so then we read, Christian saying, "Pray, sir, open this secret to me." And a worldly wise man says, "Why, in yonder village," the village is named Morality, okay? So the way he's going to describe the way you get to the celestial city is by good works. "There dwells a gentleman whose name is Legality, a very judicious man, and a man of very good name, that has skill to help men off with such burdens as thine from their shoulders." Because you see throughout the story here, at least the opening parts, Christian still has this burden on his back. And that's the question. How can I get rid of this burden? This burden that causes me to sink into greater despair? I need to find a way to get rid of it. And worldly wise man says, well, I've got a way to show you. What you need to do is you need to keep the law. "Yet in my knowledge he hath done a great deal of good this way. Aye, and besides he hath skill to cure those that are somewhat crazed in their wits with their burden," which of course Christian was. He was crazed in his wits with his burden. "To him, as I said, thou mayest go and be helped presently. His house is not quite a mile from this place, and if he should not be at home himself, he hath a pretty young man to his son, whose name is Civility." So we've got legality, morality, civility. These are the things to follow and to listen to if you want to have the burden fall off your back. "Whose name is Civility, that can do it," to speak on, "as well as the old gentleman himself. There, I say, thou mayest be eased of thy burden. And if thou art not minded to go back to the former habitation, as indeed I would not wish thee, thou mayest send for thy wife and children to thee to this village, where there are houses now standing empty, one of which thou mayest have at a reasonable rate. So go see this man. Go to the town of Morality. Go visit Civility. Learn what it means to follow the law. And you'll just see that the burden that you have of guilt will just fall off your back. And it'll feel so good that you'll call back to your wife and to your children and say, "Come here, live with me in this world where I'm a follower of the law." Well, what we find is that the Christian is crushed under the weight of Sinai's law. This way is even more burdensome, and his backpack is even heavier. He wishes that he hadn't come this way. Because, of course, as the scriptures teach, the law was never meant to save. Keeping of the law is no way to have our guilt removed. What the law is designed to do is to convince us of our sinfulness and our separation from God. And so he continues on his journey, and once again onto the stage comes evangelist. An evangelist now is going to identify the folly and the fallacy of worldly wise man's advice. And this is what he said. Then evangelist proceeded, saying, "Give more earnest heed to the things that I shall tell thee of. I will now show thee who it was that deluded you. That was worldly wise man. Deluded thee, and who it was also to whom he sent thee. The man that met thee is one worldly wise man, and rightly is he so man that met thee is one. The man that met thee is one worldly wise man, and rightly is he so called, partly because he savored only the doctrine of this world. Therefore, he always goes to the town of morality to church. That's interesting. He goes to the town of morality in order to go to church. And what does he hear at church in the town of morality? Keep the law, keep the law, keep the law. Do these things and you'll be saved. And partly because he loveth that doctrine best, for it saveth him from the cross. He goes to the town of morality and listens to the doctrine of the law because it keeps him from having to go to the foot of the cross. Now there are three things in this man's counsel that thou must utterly abhor: his turning thee out of the way, his laboring to render the cross odious to you, and his setting thy feet in that way that leadeth into the ministration of death. Here's why the counsel that you got from worldly wise man is bad. He wants to make the cross odious to you. He wants to lead you in the way of death, because the following of the law only leads not to salvation, but to death. First, thou must abhor his turning thee out of the way, yea, and thy own consenting thereto, because this is to reject the counsel of God for the counsel of a worldly wise man. You've got a choice to make. Will you follow the way of the Lord, as outlined in the Scriptures, or will you follow the way of doing good works that cannot save? The Lord says, strive to enter in at the strait gate, the gate to which I sent thee. For strait is the gate that leadeth unto life, and few there be that find it. From this little wicked gate, and from the way thereto, hath this wicked man turned thee to the bringing of thee almost to destruction. Hate therefore his turning thee out of the way, and abhor thyself from hearkening to him. In other words, Christian was on his way toward that wicked gate. But worldly wise man has turned him, put him off on a siding to look to the city of morality, the church of morality, civility, salvation by good works. Secondly, thou must abhor his laboring to render the cross odious to you, for thou art to prefer it before the treasures of Egypt. Besides, the King of glory hath told thee, he that will save his life shall lose it. And he that comes after him and hates not his father and mother and wife and children and brethren and sisters, yea, and his own life also, he cannot be my disciple. I say therefore, for a man to labor to persuade thee that shall be thy death, without which the truth hath said, thou canst not have eternal life. This doctrine thou must abhor. Thirdly, thou must hate his setting of thy feet in the way that leadeth to the ministration of death. And for this thou must consider to whom he sent thee, and also how unable that person was to deliver thee from thy burden. Legality, morality, civility, not bad things in and of themselves, but by following them, one cannot be saved. And of course, we have the broader teaching of the Scriptures in the book of Romans that says we're not able to keep the law perfect, and in fact, we don't want to keep the law perfect. So this is a dead-end street. New Christian looked for nothing but death and began to cry. He cried out lamentably, even cursing the time in which he met with Mr. Worldly Wise Men, still calling himself 1,000 fools for hearkening to his counsel. He also was greatly ashamed to think that this gentleman's arguments, following only from the flesh, should have that prevalency with him to forsake the right way. This done, he applied himself again to evangelist in words and sense. So Christian now comes to see the error of his ways, and he cries out, is there any hope for me. I am sorry I have hearkened to this man's counsel, but may my sin be forgiven? An evangelist says, yes, your sin may be forgiven, but don't turn away from the way again. Evangelist said to him, thy sin is very great, for by it thou hast committed two evils. Thou hast forsaken the way that is good to tread in forbidden paths, yet will the man at the gate receive thee, for he has goodwill for men. You see, remember now, Christian is making his way to that wicket gate. And we'll see what that wicket gate is in just a second. Yes, there's hope for you, evangelist says. The man who is standing at that gate, who is goodwill, he has goodwill for men. Only said he take heed that thou turnest not aside again, lest thou perish from the way when his wrath is kindled but a little. Then did Christian address himself to go back, and evangelist, after he had kissed him, gave him one smile and bid him Godspeed. He's left his home. He's left his family. Two of his friends come after him. One immediately turns away. The other travels a little bit further. They cross the slough of despond. They both begin to sink. Pliable says, I want no more part of this, and he goes home. Now Christian is on his own, and he travels along, and he comes across Mr. Worldly Wise Man. Mr. Wise Man says, you're not going on the right path. Evangelist steered you wrong. You need to go this path. Civility, legalism, morality. Just do good works, and you'll arrive at the celestial city, which of course we know from the teaching of the scriptures is absolutely wrong. For it's not by works of righteousness that we have done, but by his grace has he saved us. Next scene. Finally, Christian arrives at the wicket gate. And the wicket gate marks the end of a portion of the journey and the beginning of another portion of the journey. The portion of the journey that ends is Christian's search for a path to the celestial city on his own. Is this the way? Shall I listen to you? Is this the way? Shall I listen to you? Maybe this is the way. Shall I listen to you? When he comes to the wicket gate, now then, he realizes that the pathway to the celestial city is the pathway of holiness. And as he goes through the gate, he now is on the right road that leads to the celestial city. So over the gate of the wicket gate, there's a sign that says, knock, and it shall be opened to you. And Mr. Goodwill comes to him, and he lets him through the gate. And Christian then begins to explain to him all of his exploits. And Goodwill, when he hears what he's been through with regard to Mr. Worldly Wise Man, Goodwill says that the way of the law has been death for so many. And so Mr. Goodwill says, that mountain has been the death of many. Now, the mountain he's talking about is Mount Sinai. It's a reference to the keeping of the law. That mountain has been the death of many, because, of course, the giving of the law was never given for the purpose of an individual being saved, and will be the death of many more. It is well you escaped being dashed in pieces by it. Christian says, why, truly, I do not know what I had become of me there, had not evangelist happily met me again as I was musing in the midst of my dumps. But it was God's mercy that he came to me again, for else I had never come hither. But now I am come, such as one as I am, more fit indeed for death by that mounting, than thus to stand talking with my Lord. But oh, what a favor is this to me, that yet I am admitted entrance here. Goodwill says, we make no objections against any, notwithstanding all they have done before they come hither. They in no wise are cast out. You've made mistakes, even in your desire to find the celestial city. But no one is in any wise cast out if they come to the gate. And therefore, good Christian, come a little way with me, and I will teach thee about the way thou must go. Look before thee. Dost thou see this narrow way? That is the way thou must go. It was cast up by the patriarchs, the prophets, Christ and his apostles, and it is as straight as a rule can make it. This is the way thou must go. But, said Christian, are there no turnings or windings by which a stranger may lose the way? Yes, there are, said Goodwill. There are many ways, but down upon this, and they are crooked and wide. But thus thou mayest distinguish the right from the wrong, that only being straight and narrow. Then I saw in my dream that Christian asked him further if he could not help him off with his burden that was upon his back, for as yet he had not got rid thereof, nor could he by any means get it off without help. He told him, as to thy burden, be content to bear it until thou comest to the place of deliverance, for there it will fall from thy back itself. Then Christian began to gird up his loins and to address himself to his journey. So the other told him that by that he was gone some distance from the gate, he would come at the house of the interpreter, at whose door he should knock, and he would show him excellent things. Then Christian took his leave of his friend and again bid him Godspeed. So now, the first part of the journey has ended. He is off the part of the journey where he's looking for alternative ways of gaining salvation. But finally, he gets to the wicket gate, and Mr. Goodwill gives him entrance to it and explains to him that these other ways of gaining salvation, there's no life in them. There's nothing but death. So he sets Christian back on his journey and tells him he's going to go next to the interpreter's house. Now, the interpreter's house is the storehouse of God's wisdom and the experiences of men revealed by the Holy Spirit. So he goes to the house of interpreter. An interpreter takes him to a number of different rooms, a number of different scenes. So in the first scene, Christian is shown a picture of one whose role is to know and unfold dark things to sinners and is authorized by the Lord to guide you. So he's in this house, and essentially what's being said is you're now in the context of God revealing his truth to you. Then he takes Christian into a dusty room. The dusty room represents the unsanctified heart of an individual. And he's shown that that room can be made clean by the sprinkling with water. Sprinkling of the water of life. Then interpreter takes Christian into a room where he meets two children, passion and patience. And so we read about patience and patience. So he said, this is interpreter speaking to Christian, these two lads are figures, passion of the men of this world and patience of the men of that which is to come. For as here thou seest, passion will have all now, this year, that is to say, in this world. So are men of the world, They must have all their good things now. They cannot stay till next year, that is, until the next world for their portion of good. That proverb, a bird in hand is worth two in the bush, is of more authority with them than are all the divine testimonies of the good of the world to come. But as thou sawest that he had quickly lavished all away, he had presently left him nothing but rags, so will it be with all such men at the end of this world. Again, if all we think of, if what we think of is that in this world that's all there is, you only go around once in life, you have to grab it now. That's a losing philosophy. Then said Christian, now I see that patience has the best wisdom, and that upon many accounts, because he stays for the best things, and also because he will have the glory of his when the other has nothing but rags. So interpreter says, nay, you may add another, to wit, the glory of the next world will never wear out. But of this world, they are suddenly gone. Therefore, passion had not so much reason to laugh at patience because he had his good things first, as patience will have to laugh at passion because he had his best things last. So another picture in the house of the interpreter. The Holy Spirit now speaking into Christian's life, into the life of anybody who is reading this. The first picture says, the one speaking to you has authority to lead you on the way. The second scene, the dusty room. This is the condition of your heart, but it can be cleaned. The third picture of passion and patience. That there are those who have their eyes focused squarely on this world. You only go around once in a life, so grab all the gusto that you can, as opposed to patience, who recognizes that indeed the glory of the eternal world will last, in fact, eternally, forever. They move on in the interpreter's house, and Christian sees a wall that's on fire, with someone throwing water on it. The fire is God's grace. The water is the evil one trying to quench that fire of passion for God. But Christ will not let it happen. Christ maintains the fire. And now Christian sees a vision, finally, of judgment. And of one who, when the sheaves are being gathered in, is left behind. And is filled with fear that he himself would not be gathered in. Christian wants to move on. But interpreter says, tarry till I show you one more thing, and then you shall go on your way. So he took Christian by the hand again and led him into a chamber where there was one rising out of bed. And as he put on his raiment, he shook and trembled. Then said Christian, why does this man thus tremble? The interpreter then bid him tell to Christian the reason of his so doing. So he began and he said, this night as I was in my sleep, I dreamed. So now there's a dream happening within a dream. And behold, the heavens grew exceeding black. Also it thundered and lightning in my fearful wise, that it put me into an agony. So I looked up in my dream and saw the clouds rack at an unusual rate, upon which I heard a great sound of a trumpet, and saw a man sit upon a cloud, attended with the thousands of heaven, and they were all in flaming fire. Also the heavens were on burning flame. I heard then a voice saying, arise, ye dead, and come to judgment. And with that the rocks rent, the graves opened, and the dead that were therein came forth. Some of them were exceeding glad and looked upward. Some sought to hide themselves under the mountains. Then I saw the man that sat upon the cloud open the book and bid the world draw near. Yet there was by reason of a fierce flame that issued out and came from before him a convenient distance betwixt him and them, as betwixt the judge and the prisoners at the bar. I heard it also proclaimed to them that attended on the man that sat on the cloud, gather together the tares, the chaff, and the stubble, and cast them into the burning lake. And with what the bottomless pit opened, just whereabout I stood, out of the mouth of which there came in an abundant manner smoke and coals of fire with hideous noises. I was also said to the same person, gather my wheat. It was also said to the same person, gather my wheat into the garner. And with that I saw many catched up and carried away in the clouds, but I was left behind. I also sought to hide myself, but I could not. For the man that sat upon the cloud still kept his eye upon me. My sins also came into my mind, and my conscience did accuse me on every side. Upon this I awakened from my sleep. So Christian says, but what was it that made you so afraid of the sight? And the man says, why, I thought that the day of judgment was come, and that I was not ready for it. But this frightened me most, that the angels gathered up several and left me behind. Also the pit of hell opened her mouth just where I stood. My conscience too afflicted me, and as I thought, the judge had always his eye upon me, showing indignation in his countenance. Then the interpreter said to Christian, hast thou considered all of these things? Last scene for tonight. Probably the most familiar portion of Pilgrim's Progress, and the one that has been dramatized over and over again, and the one really that fills us with such great joy. So let me share that with you. Chapter 6. Now I saw in my dream that the highway up which Christian was to go was fenced on either side with a wall, and that wall was called salvation. Up this way, therefore, did burdened Christian run, but not without great difficulty because of the load on his back. He ran thus till he came at a place somewhat ascending, and upon that place stood a cross, and a little below in the bottom a sepulchre. So I saw in my dream that just as Christian came up with the cross, his burden loosed from his shoulders and fell from his back and began to tumble, and so continued to do so till it came to the mouth of the sepulchre, where it fell in, and I saw it no more. Then was Christian glad and lightsome, and said with a merry heart, he hath given me rest by his sorrow, and life by his death. Then he stood still a while to look and wonder, for it was very surprising to him that the sight of the cross should thus ease him of his burden. He looked therefore and looked again, even till the springs that were in his head sent the waters down his cheeks. Now as he stood looking and weeping, behold, 3 shining ones came to him and saluted him with, peace be to thee. So the first shining one said to him, thy sins are forgiven. The second stripped him of his rags and clothed him with a change of raiment. And the third also set a mark upon his forehead and gave him a roll with a seal upon it, which he bid him look on as he ran, and that he should give it at the celestial gate. And so they went their way. Then Christian gave 3 leaps for joy, and he went on singing. Thus far did I come laden with my sin, nor could aught ease the grief that I was in. Till I came hither, what a place is this? Must here be the beginning of my bliss? Must here the burden fall from off my back? Must here the strings that bounded to my crack? Blessed cross, blessed sepulchre, blessed rather be the man that there was put to shame for me. And so, Christian loses the pack of sin and guilt when he looks to the cross of Jesus Christ. And those sins are died for by Christ, by the risen Christ, and those sins roll into the empty tomb, and they're seen no more. But here's the interesting thing about Pilgrim's Progress. If we are not familiar with the entire story, we might think that Pilgrim's Progress is the story that leads Christian to the point of being forgiven. But we have not even dealt with the first third of Pilgrim's Progress. There's still 2/3 of the story yet to tell. And so what is Pilgrim's Progress? It's a story that's reflective of good Reformed theology, that an individual comes to Christ and is saved, but not only is he saved from the guilt of his sin, but he's saved for a life lived in honor and glory to the Jesus who saved him. And then, at the end of the road, there's the celestial city. So the Pilgrim's Progress is a story not only of redemption and coming to Christ, but 2/3 of the story is about life lived as a Christian. And it's tough. And it's a road and it's a journey of faith that leads to the celestial city. And next week, we'll take a few more stops along the road. Thank you again so much for tuning in, for hanging in there, and may God bless you tonight and always.